Much everyone for joining this evening. Delighted to have Volcy with us here today and to hear more about her experiences of working with Sea Shepherd, but also directly on the Vaquita issue. Thanks again, everyone, for joining the hackathon, and we hope you have a great weekend to learn more about this issue. So Volcy, just if you wouldn't mind just quickly introducing yourself and a bit more about your experience, and then we can go straight into the questions.
So I started working with Sea Shepherd Conservation Society in 2018, first in their headquarters as an environmental analyst. And then I got on board the Milagro 5 campaign to prevent poaching activities in the Gulf of California. I was the scientist on board for 4 months. And after that, I worked for NGOs. I did my master's degree in marine systems and policies at the University of Edinburgh, where I did my dissertation on the challenges of totoaba poaching and illegal trade under the supervision of Andrea Crosta, who is the founder and executive director of Earth League International.
Thank you very much. And just a bit more about the structure of the talk today. So firstly, I'm just going to share a quick video which sort of highlights some of the issues involved in the totoaba issue. Then I'm just going to open up a few questions for Volcy, and then at the end we will open up a Q&A session as well with the audience, and we'll probably be finished around sort of 7:30, depending on questions. So now I'm going to try and successfully share my screen based on how well Zoom likes to behave. Okay, so this is just a very small video from ABC, and they covered the issue in the Sea of Cortez last year, but it gives a bit more background to some of the key issues which you will be working on this weekend in the hackathon, including Andrea Crosta as well. So I will just play this for you now.
More and more poachers are coming. They're attacking us.
In the Sea of Cortez, off the coast of Mexico,
They are continuing to throw things.
there is a war in the waters. Not over drugs.
It's alive!
But over illegal fishing. The prize, the totoaba, a large fish only found in these waters and treasured on China's black market for its swim bladder. Cooked in soups to satisfy Chinese consumers who believe the organs have medicinal properties.
They call it the cocaine of the sea. It's worth more than gold, in fact.
Now the bass is critically endangered. They've been dangerously overfished, and human activity has reduced their natural habitat.
We filmed totoabas like this at $100,000 a piece.
Gillnets miles long, a minefield under the surface, taking the lives of scores of other marine life.
These nets are anchored to the seafloor, and so they can't pull those nets up to the surface to take a breath. And so a marine mammal or a sea turtle, they're going to drown really quickly.
The net's also lethal for the Vaquita, a rare porpoise that's the smallest marine mammal in the world, driven to the brink of extinction with less than 15 left globally.
I keep thinking about the moment when only one Vaquita would be left in the wild.
This is a war against the extinction of a species.
It's one of the million species the UN recently identified as facing extinction, the rarest marine mammal caught in a web of illegal fishing, Mexican cartels, and the Chinese mafia.
It's highly, highly symbolic. It's like what we are doing to the Sea of Cortez and to the Vaquita is it's a case study of what we are doing to the planet.
This is an alarm bell ringing, and I hope everybody really sits up and pays attention.
Clock's ticking. We will fight for every single life.
All this now the subject of a new National Geographic documentary, Sea of Shadows.
You talk about in the film that you imagine the Vaquita calling out for help and nobody hearing that call.
Yeah, it was a dream. I dreamt the last Vaquita on Earth calling out to others, to family members, but silent. And that haunted me.
To sit there and let an entire ocean die because of the greed of a few, and to be okay with that is unacceptable. As a species, that is unacceptable. If that happens, we should be ashamed.
The documentary brings together the stories of the varied groups working to rescue the vaquita.
Why this topic? Why Mexico? Why the vaquita?
I did this other film called The Ivory Game about the extinction of elephants.
One person has in his hands the destiny of an entire species.
It was a very successful film in regards that at the end, China banned the ivory trade. I heard about the Totoaba Vaquita crisis from one of the characters of the film, Andrea Crosta.
We saw with our own eyes all those illegal pangas escaped. Back here, like a safe haven for Totoaba poachers. It smells. The whole thing stinks.
Andrea Crosta is a hard-charging conservationist with a background in security. His team, consisting of many former FBI and intelligence officers, aims to choke off the chain of criminal activities driving this crisis to the brink.
From the outside, it looks like an environmental story, right? When you dive in, you understand the role of transnational crime, the narco trafficking, working with Chinese traffickers, where they form what we call Totoaba cartels because they work in the same way, with an incredible power to corrupt all over the places.
I got the call to join a group of veterinarians and scientists to help save the vaquita from extinction by bringing it into human care. No other option was working.
While Crosta's team works on land on the criminal side, Cynthia Smith leads a team of scientists trying to rehabilitate the vaquita population.
The speed at which the species was declining really picked up. There were 100, and then there were 60, and then there were 30, and now there's fewer than 30. The dilemma that we were facing was if we brought an animal into our care and it was showing us clear evidence that it wasn't acclimating to humans, that's when the difficulty comes in. There's 15 left. There's so few vaquitas left to release them back knowing that those nets are there and they may drown tomorrow.
It's a dilemma the team faced head-on when after weeks of trying, they finally spot the elusive vaquita.
I remember the call, we have 2 vaquitas out like 3 miles north of the buoy, blah, 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 and everyone was racing there and they're like, okay, this is it.
It's like a lightning bolt, just goes across the water and everybody just feels the energy and the excitement, but also the tension and the nerves.
And suddenly it was there. It was real. It was in front of us. No myth, no ghost, really there. My God, we all fell in love with it. It was an amazing experience to be so close to an animal that never had ever been close to. Nobody had ever touched alive.
But despite their efforts, the vaquita could not acclimate.
Come on, sweetie.
She died of a heart attack after just a few hours.
It's still hard to talk about, and I've thought a lot about, why is that? What's different about this? And I think it's because the night that we lost that animal, it just felt like the whole species was slipping away from us. And to have her slipping through our fingers like that and not be able to just, hold on to her. It's hard.
So that sort of gives a rather quite emotional overview of the situation, the urgent situation facing the vaquita. And just quickly before I just move into Volcy, so tomorrow we are hosting the Vaquita Hacks, and we are working with Sanjana from Earth Hacks. Sanjana, I don't know if you just wanted to introduce yourself very briefly as well. She might be there.
Hey, yes, sorry. Yeah, hi, I'm Sanjana. I run Earth Hacks. That's my dog, Goose. He's our intern. So we're very excited to kick off the very first Vaquita Hacks tomorrow morning with all of you and people from all over the world. We really hope that even though the situation is very dire for the vaquita and for several other species, that perhaps an innovation format like this that produces very, very focused solutions to very, very focused problems can serve as a blueprint for, wildlife problems in the future, and hopefully also support organizations like Earth League International that are doing the on-the-ground work and are making strides in the really, really complicated social and environmental issues surrounding vaquita conservation. So we're really happy to see so many of you here, and I'll turn it back over to Harry and Volcy so that we can get started.
Thanks very much, Sanjana. That's great. It's been great to work with you. And so Dr. Odine Serrano is another key person who we're running Earth Hacks with, and she is from the Counter Wildlife Trafficking Institute in America. I do see David Luna is also here on the call, and David is a co-director with myself at the Conservation Project International, and David will be speaking tomorrow as well. David, do you just maybe want to give a quick introduction as well?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Harry, and I thank everyone who's on this call and all of our partners for this exciting hackathon this weekend. And I would like to thank Earthlink International, the Countering Wildlife Trafficking Institute, Earth Hacks, Microsoft, NGA, and many others who have made this possible, and all the hard work by the TCPI team. And again, I think working together, we can come up with some very innovative solutions to help save the vaquitas and other endangered wildlife. So thank you, Harry, as well, for your leadership in leading this effort.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so Volcy, again, thank you for joining us. So first question I had really was what an extraordinary film The Sea of Shadows was, and an extraordinary character Andrea Costa is, and his leadership in this area. Firstly, what did you think of the film, and yeah, how was that sort of raised the profile of the Vaquita issue?
Well, first of all, I wish I could have seen this film before going on board with Sea Shepherd. However, it was not released yet at this time, and I think that now any new crew member going to the Milagro campaign, watch it before being on the field. Yes, you know, the totoaba poaching and illegal trade has not only a dramatic impact on the marine environment, it has also strong repercussions on the social, economic, and political stability in this region. And I think this documentary really highlights that. Plus, I think that the film brings to light the complexity of this issue, and it's looking at illegal fishers in the Gulf of California, but it's also revealing the criminal activities involved in the totoaba illegal trade. Supply chain.
Thank you. Yeah, so that was my kind of like leading on to my second question, because I remember in the film, Andrea talks about how this is a criminality issue rather than a sort of more conservation issue. And you know, what do you think he really means by that?
Well, for many years, totoaba poaching and trade has been addressed as a conservation issue, totally discarding the transnational organized crime component. And efforts have been mainly been on trying to prevent the illegal fishers from poaching the totoabas. However, this environmental crime will not cease until the real criminal actors who are found higher in the supply chain have been stopped.
Thank you. And the film itself, I know it's had some impact on the criminality issue. I mean, from your perspective, working on the issue, what do you think the film has done to raise awareness about the illegal totoaba and Vaquita issue?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, of course. No. So you know, what do you think the film has done to raise awareness about the issue?
Well, you know, like I think that before this movie, people would just look at illegal fishers and try to blame illegal fishers who most of the time just poach totoabas to sustain their livelihoods. And now, thanks to this movie, we can see like the real criminals and try to focus endeavors in the supply chain, trying to dismantle the supply chain.
Amazing. And so how did you actually get involved with Sea Shepherd? It's quite an extraordinary opportunity.
I started working the headquarters, and I studied and I looked at this issue, but I didn't know I would get involved in this campaign. At that time, Sea Shepherd was looking for a scientific person to prepare the mission and get on board. And so they asked me, and I was like, oh, yes, sure, absolutely, I go. And so that's how I got involved in the Vaquita campaign. And I stayed there as the lead scientist for 4 months.
Amazing. What do you have any memorable experiences that really stood out for you? I probably have quite a few, but if you, any sort of that stayed in your mind during your time there?
Yes, I have one. So we were retrieving nets, and I remember once we retrieved these nets full of live animals, and it was a rush against the time, and we did all we could to save as many animals, and at the end of the day we saved so many animals. It was a great experience, but like it's always a mix of feelings and emotions, because like when you save these animals you feel great, but at the same time when you can't save them, when you see them dying in front of your eyes, then it's harder.
It must have been awful. And I guess that the gillnet issue is so significant in terms of just, just tell us a bit more about the problem with gillnets.
Just going to define what a gillnet is. So a gillnet is basically, it forms a wall of netting in the water column. So the mesh size varies depending on the targeted species. The issue with gillnets is that it's a static gear, so it is more likely to get lost due to bad weather or due to dissociation with the marked buoys. When it gets lost, because it's made of nylon, it can last forever in the marine environment, and it drifts away with the current, entangling many animals. In the case of totoaba and vaquita, the big issue is that totoaba and vaquita have a similar size, which means that when fishers fish for the totoaba, they also catch the vaquita.
Thanks, Volcy. And just in terms of the Sea Shepherd's work, I've seen recently that they've been targeted by some of the cartel boats. What are some of the repercussions for Sea Shepherd actually doing the work of removing the gillnets? It seems like quite a dangerous situation.
Yes, I remember a few days after I left the boat, the Farley Mowat boat was assaulted with projectiles from illegal poachers. Actually, Francesca, who is on this call, I see, was the scientist at this time, so she could talk about it. But I have friends now in the campaign who told me that the situation gets worse and worse with the illegal fishers and the cartels.
Brilliant. So now, in terms of the current situation for the Vaquita, it seems quite dire, very urgent. Do you have any sort of updates from your work, or what is the current situation for the Vaquita in the Sea of Cortez?
As you said, it's a dire situation. There are so few left. I think that from scientific studies, there are less than 10 individuals now. Plus, like the Vaquita has a very slow reproduction. A female usually gives birth to a calf every 2 years. Poaching is not ceasing, and it actually increased with COVID-19. So, let's be hopeful still, otherwise we don't do this hackathon. But it's a very dire situation.
Yeah, it is very tragic. I think that's one of the reasons why we've all pulled together this weekend, is to try and come up with sort of new solutions to help the work of Earthleague International. But from your experience, what do you think really needs to change in this situation?
I think we need to change our perception of the issue. We have been addressing this issue so much with conservation plans, just totally discarding the real criminals. And it's been years and years they work on conservation plans, which are totally hindered by the criminal activities. I think that to address this issue, to really come to an end, we need to dismantle the supply chain, to find the weakest level in the supply chain and dismantle it. And then if we dismantle this supply chain, we would be able to put in place conservation plans and like make the whole ecosystem gets better there.
So it's kind of the criminality issue is the primary focus now.
Yeah, the corruption and the criminal issue, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. I mean, do you have any hope? Do you hold out any hope that we can save the vaquita or species like it?
Very little, but there is always, that's why we're all here, I guess. And if the vaquita gets extinct, well, I think that we need to learn from our mistakes to not to repeat these mistakes with other critically endangered species.
Excellent. Well, Volcy, thank you so much. That was a really powerful account, I think, of your experience. And we really appreciate your time. And we're going to open this up now to anyone who has a question. I think the most easiest thing to do is if you have a question, you can quickly just pop your name in the chat, and then we can turn to you in the Zoom call. So does anyone have any questions for Volcy at all?
Hey, Harry, it's David Luna.
Yes, David.
Thank you very much again, Volcy, for being with us. Let me ask you, you've done a lot of research on the analyses of the Tatoba swim bladder illegal trade. And you looked a little bit into the gaps, the governance gaps with respect to Mexican federal law and internationally. Mm-hmm. What are some of these gaps? And as part of innovative legal solutions, in addition to the technological solutions that the hackathon will address, where do you see ways that governments can work with NGOs and the private sectors to close some of these gaps, to do more together?
So I analyzed the Mexican environmental laws pertaining to this issue. I also analyzed the American ones and the Chinese ones, because like that the three countries really involved in the Totoaba trade. And on the Mexico side, I didn't see really like loopholes in the wildlife laws, like it tends to be like a strong legal basis in terms of protecting wildlife. So the issue on Mexico is not an issue in gaps in the legal frameworks. It's more an issue of enforcement of the laws. And that can be explained by a few points. First of all, there is a weak judicial system in Mexico. There is a lot of corruption. And when there are Totoaba seizures, there are no prosecutions on the smugglers or the criminals. So that's the thing on Mexico. However, when I was studying the Chinese legal frameworks, well, I found a lot of loopholes in their legal frameworks. There is a lot to be done to better protect the wildlife and animal trade there. So that's why, we always focus on Mexico, but the issue is also part of the Chinese government and how they see wildlife trade. So like that's the source of the problem at the end of the day. And that's why it would be nice to like look how Chinese could like really address this issue. On the American side, there is no loophole. I don't see any loopholes either on the wildlife protection, their legal frameworks, but they have a real potential to help Mexico dismantle the supply chain. And I think, at the end of the day, if the Chinese government, the Mexican government, and the American one collaborate together, share information, try to find solutions together, there could be like really something done, but they haven't really like done that in the past. There have been like so few cooperation on this issue, and they really need to improve collaboration. And with CITES too, like CITES should be like addressing this issue better. Sorry, it's a very long reply. I've been talking for 5 minutes.
But thank you very much. And I do agree that, look, we can't look at this only from a conservation. We need to be looking at it from a criminal law enforcement to deal with the corruption and the criminality. And it'd be great, if at some point there were to be a trilateral commission between China, Mexico, and the US to really more robustly enforce the laws and disrupt the illicit trade. So again, Volcy, thank you very much for your research and for being with us. I'm sure some of our other colleagues have questions.
Thanks very much, David. Really good question. Volcy, a great answer as well. And some of the legal solutions actually encompass some of those points you made that the teams will be working on tomorrow. We have a question from Jesse in the chat. Jesse, would you like to ask the question to Volcy?
Sure, that sounds fine. Let me see if I can get my video to turn on here too. So thanks so much, Volcy, for all your reflections. So we saw in the documentary that there were some efforts that were undertaken for species rehabilitation. And in the documentary, they turned out quite tragically. I was wondering, in your experience working with Sea Shepherd, or since you've worked there, if there have been some additional rehabilitation efforts, and if so, if you could give us a sense of what they look like.
You're talking about the CPR operation, right? When they put the Vaquita in a facility to breed it.
Yes.
Yes. No, they haven't tried something similar after that. They just figure out that the Vaquita population was too small and that this species was not fit to be in a breeding captivity. So how do you call it? The scientific community working on that just said, okay, we won't try something similar. We are just going to try to stop poaching activities and remove all gill nets in the Gulf of California. Did I answer your question?
Great, thank you very much, Jesse, for the question, and Volcy. Jim has asked, Jim, I don't know, you can ask the question, or I'm happy to ask it for you, whatever you fancy, but it's really around your research paper that you've done, Volcy, and when that might be available.
Yeah, it's a sad geek question. I'm really interested in seeing Volcy's paper. We were tantalized with it in the briefing notes.
Yeah, I would be happy to share it with you. It's not ready for publication yet. I've been working with that with Andrea. However, if you want to read the 50 pages, it's I can send it to you, yes.
Yes, please. I am that sad.
It's a very good read, Jim. I've read it myself. It's very good. Thanks for your question. I think we have Kieran, who's asked for a question around trafficking routes.
Hi, Harry. Thanks to you and your colleagues and Sanjana for hosting the weekend, first of all, and Volcy also for her time this evening. I just wanted to ask Volcy if she's aware, it was noted in the documentary that they typically use Tijuana by air, they avoid Shanghai. So do they typically fly from Tijuana to Hong Kong, or are the routes they typically use to traffic the total boa swim bladders known?
That's a very good point. And I think the traffickers, I think they are pretty smart about how they send the swim bladder to China, because they take indirect flights. They know that otherwise they will have controls when they arrive in Hong Kong or China. So they tend to take indirect flights to sometimes even South Asia or the US. The US is a big how do you say that? Is a big stop. So that's why it's also very hard to put sanctions on airports or flying companies. They never know how they are going to smuggle the swim bladder.
Okay, yeah, I was imagining it might be through the US, and if you've got customs in airports that aren't familiar with the swim bladder or what it is, it's easier to get it through that route than where the Mexican officials might be more aware. So obviously, if you're in Tijuana, you can just go over the border to San Diego or, you know, LA, and,
Sorry. Good.
and use different routes then. So it's kind of like an education issue where different countries that may be used as intermediaries, the customs duties officers or the airlines might not be aware of what they're actually trafficking in the cargo. And I actually work in the aviation industry, and I know that through IATA, which is the International Association of Transport for Aviation, they have a body which looks at and tries to combat trafficking of wildlife. So I'm just thinking it could be something to bolt into their efforts to make airlines more aware to avoid wildlife trafficking effectively.
That's a good idea. And I think that's a good point. The US is a big transit countries, and that's mostly where, when there are Totoaba seizures, that's usually where it happens. It's in the US, at the border of Mexico and the US.
Okay, thank you, Volcy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Some really great questions there. We have a question from Abby, a really very interesting question about the sort of consumer side of the Totoaba market. Abby, would you like to ask Volcy the question?
Sure, yeah. Sorry, my internet's terrible, so I'm going to attempt this. Hi, Volcy. So the documentary seems to really highlight the fact that Totoaba swim bladders are expensive products. So do you know who the consumers are that are buying them? Because it just seems that knowing who they are would really help us sort of target messaging and understand how to approach the subject a bit better.
Yes. Yes, you're right. So I just want to precise that Totoaba trade is a small trade comparing to other wildlife trades, such as like ivory, for instance. It's kind of small. So like the buyers are usually wealthy Chinese people who, you know, like who invest on swim bladders or like consume it. But they are, I don't know how to say it in English, but they are they are often the same, you know, like it's a small community of investors and buyers. And I don't know how the Chinese government could address this issue. It's really an underground market. But they have made effort in the past, and they have dismantled some high criminal Totoaba traffickers there in China, and investors as well.
Thank you very much, Abby. Thank you very much, Volcy. Jim, I think you have a further question.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the so the paper's very interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading Volcy's paper. But the thought occurred to me, I didn't really get a feeling for what's the attitude of the three governments, the sort of, you know, the Mexicans, the US and the Chinese, but particularly the Mexicans and the US, because it seems to me that it's such a leaky bucket problem in terms of trying to stop the trade in the Totoaba and and protect the Vaquita, that really we need to get the governments on board. And I can see the problems in terms of the judiciary and the enforcement and the corruption, but do we have sort of, the particularly the American and the Mexican and the US governments, are they on board with trying to save it? How on board are they?
Volcy, sorry, you're on mute there.
How do you get them on board? That's your question?
No, it's more a question of, well, we need to get them on board because otherwise it's not going to work. So the question is, are we going to effectively have to force them on board, or are they on board already? Are they sympathetic, genuinely sympathetic? For example, in Mexico, is the problem not that the government doesn't want to solve the problem, but that the Mexican government is struggling with the corruption and the enforcement and the resources? Or is it just that they really don't care?
Well, at first, I think at the beginning of this issue, like a few years ago, the Mexican government was not taking this issue very seriously. But then, let's say like 3 or 4 years ago, they started to implement conservation plans and start addressing this issue. However, as you say, they don't have like, they can't tackle this issue alone. They don't have like the justice system or correct enforcement of the law to just address this issue by themselves. So that's why they need, I think, like collaboration from the American and the Chinese governments to help them. Did I answer your question? I think there was another.
Yeah, you did. Thanks. That's very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you, Volcy. I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions. If anyone else would like to ask any questions. Okay, well, thank you so much again to Volcy, a superstar in this area. Thank you everyone for attending, and we are very excited to welcome you all tomorrow. Oh, we just have 2 questions from David. Last minute questions coming in. David, do you want to ask your 2 questions?
Hi, Volcy. Thank you for your intervention. So one question is in regarding the nets and resources they come from. So this type of market is in any way like collateral branch of more serious crimes like drug trafficking, human trafficking. So they acquire resources from these major branches. So it's not self-contained. Is it have they any connection with these major branches?
A connection with human smuggling and drug trafficking?
For example, the money to
yes, that's what we think. So I can't confirm that, but like usually criminal activities related to wildlife trade has always like connection with like human smuggling or drug trafficking. That's something that is known. In case of the Totoaba poaching and trade, that's what we think as well. However, I can confirm it, and I think Andrea would be able to answer this question better.
Yeah. And the second question is, in case the Vaquita goes extinct, will Sea Shepherd be still on the Sea Cortez to protect the ecosystem?
That's a very good question. I don't know. I hope so, because that's not only the Vaquita that is endangered there. That's a lot of marine animals. That's I can't tell you how many fish, how many reptiles we found in the illegal nets or ghost nets. It was just, there are so many endangered species there that I hope that they will keep patrolling and retrieving nets there.
Great, David, thank you for that. Volcy, thank you again. Unless anyone else, we have one last question. Okay, Jim, just very quickly.
Sorry,
no problem.
Snuck in at the end. So just because my last 7 years I've spent in fisheries in the UK, I hadn't thought about that. Is it, when you were finding nets, is it predominantly ghost nets, or is it predominantly recently set nets that are targeting the species?
That's a good question. So me, at the beginning of the campaign, which was in August, the campaign was actually called the Ghost Net campaign, because our main objective was to retrieve as many ghost nets in the Vaquita refuge. And gosh, there were so many. Then I think starting in October, it became the Milagro campaign. So just to like prevent poachers from entering the Vaquita refuge and retrieving active illegal nets. So it's both. It just depends on the season. But yes, basically there are nets everywhere. It is crazy. Francesca, you can confirm that she was on the boat in January, I think, and that's the high peak season. So she had a lot of work retrieving all the active nets.
Francesca, did you want to, as you work with Volcy, it might be up to you, you don't have to, if you wanted to just quickly just introduce yourself. No pressure.
Hello, everyone. Well, no pressure, but I'm here. Hello, Volcy. I'm so happy to see you again.
You too. Sorry,
guys. Yes. So, a brief introduction of myself. I'm a conservation biologist, and I met Volcy on the ship. So she was actually going home, and I was entering to hover her position. So it was a very special moment. And I spent a few months on the Farley Moat as well, and then I continued my path with Sea Shepherd. So I did. I just came out from another ship where I spent 8 months. We went in Gabon. So this is what I've done so far lately. And I would like to answer this question about the nets. It was actually crazy. When I joined the ship, we immediately started a campaign called Milagro 5. And we retrieved like more than 100 nets in a bit more than 2 months. It's a crazy number. And we didn't find any ghost net. So probably you did well just before us to collect as many as possible. But the 100% of the nets we found, it was gill nets. And I have to say that maybe 30% of them, they were freshly placed, while the others, maybe they had a couple of months at sea before we arrived, something like that. And I can say that because of the amount of algae and biodiversity that meanwhile can grow on the net itself.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely to have you on the call as well. It's great. Volcy, I don't know if you had any comments on that one.
No.
Okay, brilliant. So we have one last question from Julie, and then I'm going to pass over to Sanjana, who is going to organise, I think, a group picture, group screenshot just before we end. Julie, do you want to quickly just ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Volcy, I just wanted to ask you if Sea Shepherd in the Sea of Cortez, are they also working on protecting the Totoaba, or is it just the Vaquita?
No, it's also the Totoaba. So they just, I think, put a name on the campaign, but basically they are there to protect the whole ecosystem. And the Totoaba is also a critical endangered species. So yes, we try, they try to save as many animals as possible, including the Totoaba.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone so much. It's been an amazing conversation. And again, Volcy, thanks for your time. Sanjana, I will pass over to you to wrap things up before we all depart.
Awesome.